Well, I was the most non-horror kid you would have ever met when I was growing up. So I was the kid who called his mom from the movie theater saying, "Come and get me, Ma. I can't do this." So as I've thought about that over the years, I think that's played into why I was I was probably the guy, a better guy for the job of doing the Goosebumps covers because I knew where my levels were as a little kid, so I knew to back it off. And heck, as an adult, I don't need to be scaring the heck out of myself either. Yeah, I'll get to that in a second, but you got to remember, as a guy or any student who walks out of art school, you don't just hit the streets and start doing book covers. It just doesn't work that way. So early on in my career, while I was in art school, and then immediately after I got out, I painted on uh, cars and motorcycle tanks. That's where I learned how to use airbrush. I had a friend of mine who had a body shop, and you got to remember, we're just a bunch of knucklehead 18 and 19-year-old kids doing stuff. But using the airbrush on the motorcycle tanks and cars kind of got my feet wet with how to use the airbrush. I also painted a lot of signs, restaurants. I built the signs and did the lettering. I also lettered on cars. So there was an automotive side to the whole thing, but ultimately my goal was to do book covers. And while I was doing the tanks and the signs, I was sitting down in the evenings and creating artwork that I could take to the publishers in Manhattan and show them what I could do. Now, to jump on to what you were saying about the audition, it, it it wasn't really an audition. So you got to remember that when Goosebumps started, they didn't have a lot of confidence in it. They thought that this was probably not going to do well. No one had ever tried to do horror for kids 7 to 11 years old, and I guess either gut feeling or talking about it throughout the industry, they really didn't think it was going anywhere. So it wasn't like this was a huge deal. I had never done any horror illustrations. I had done some kid stuff, fantasy, sci-fi, and there was another artist named Jim Thiessen who was a legit horror illustrator, and this stuff's incredible. So they weren't sure, they liked me, I was nice. They liked him, he was nice. And they go, well, look, we don't know. At the beginning, I was told Goosebumps was only going to be 6 books. So they said, Tim, you do one, Jim will do number two. We'll take a look at it. And then whoever we like better will do the other two or the other four. So that's what we did. And what ultimately happened, at least this was what I was told after the fact, was my art was a little bit more colorful, and they thought that kind of took the edge off of it. So the less and my stuff was less realistic than Jim's was. So it's a good search. You should search out Jim Thiessen and check out some of the stuff. So not really. I mean, the basis was still the same. I did the same process of submitting 3 sketches and approaching the art in the same way, and I used the same size illustration board and all of that. But there was just something when I worked with R.L. Stine where even though I wasn't reading the finished product, he was writing the book at the same time I was doing the cover. There was still something about his stuff that really clicked with me. And I could read the handful of sentences about what the book was about, and almost always it was immediate. I knew I had ideas. I knew what I was doing. Bone Chillers was cool, but it didn't have the same magic. Some of them did. I thought there was a couple of really good ones in there. And as an artist or as a creative person, there's pieces where you go, that could have been a little bit better. So I do like them. There was also another series called Spine Tinglers. And this is all going on at the same time. I'm doing Goosebumps, Bone Chillers, Spine Tinglers. So, and they all kind of look the same. So after a while, we did, as I think I painted every possible monster or creature or scenario that you could possibly do on a kid's horror book cover. So, what was unique about Goosebumps? I worked with an art director. She was great, and we had good communications, but it was very hands off, and that's not how most of my career had gone up to that point. And even today, when I get assignments with people, the art director is, either has a specific image or vision that they'd like you to create. But with Goosebumps, they really, if they had an idea, cool, I'll do that one. But I always submitted three. And so I was able in those other two sketches to convey my idea. And no one was prejudiced about which, oh, that's my idea. We're going to use that one because that's my idea. We just went with the best idea. And I'm not saying mine were always the better ideas. When I worked with other publishers, again, there's a committee almost, and you'll submit ideas and then you'll rework them, and then you'll get to the next step, and then they'll rework some stuff again. And there are times where by the time you get to that final painting and you finish it up, it has no resemblance to the art that you started with. Now, in all fairness, sometimes the deviation that we took was a good choice, and we ended up with something cool that I wasn't thinking of at the time. But I obviously I always like the ones where I have the thought in my head, we run with it, and that's what we end up going with. So again, this is a business. You know, there are times where people say, "Hey, Tim, will you paint me something that I can hang in my living room?" And I just want you to create something for me. And those are the ones that are purely mine. I'm not trying to convey an idea from a book or an album or a movie. It's just straight what thoughts I have in my head. As an illustrator, when I'm doing, everything else, it's always someone else's idea. It was all RL's ideas. I just needed to come up with a way to turn those set of words into a visual. So kind of the job that I do is, it's a little bit of mind reading. You want to, get inside somebody else's head and get them that vision and get it down so that I am, giving their words the best light. So on Goosebumps, not directly where I could say, hey, look at this guy's stuff and look at what I did on Goosebumps. But early on in my career, I was doing straightforward art. When I was drawing and painting in high school, you just draw what you could see. I drew cars, I drew, you name it. But there was this illustrator named Roger Dean, and he was a famous illustrator who did album covers in the 70s, 80s, 90s. He's still doing incredible art. And he really got my attention because all of his stuff came out of his head. It wasn't something that you could walk outside and see. And I don't know why it took me so long for this to hit me, but it was that thing of, oh, don't show people what they can see on their own. Show them something they can't see on their own. Come up with something new. Give them one of my friends used to refer to my paintings as a window into another world. And once he said that, I think of that all the time. I want you to step away from your regular life and look at my piece and go somewhere else. So it was this guy, Roger Dean, who really got me to think out of the box. So on the very first one, uh, which was called Welcome to Dead House, there was, I had the book was, I don't know if the book was all the way done, but there was a nice solid chapter that I got to read. So I got a real good feeling of what RL's style was, what the rhythm was to the story. But after that one, he was writing the book at the same time I was doing the cover. So that was the last set of full sets of words that I got. So RL in his writing process has to come up with the title of the book first. So he would give me the title of the book and a couple of sentences. Sometimes I got a paragraph or two, but as time went on, that got less and less and less. Now, you would think that that would be problematic, but actually that's pretty good because if I had the whole book to read, I would make sure that I read it cover to cover and studied it. And while I was reading it, I'd be taking notes, the houses that were described in the background, where, what state it was in. Is it the fall? Is it? And I would I would grind those details and make sure I got as much of that information into the painting. Now, if I don't know that, then I can kind of roll with it and everything can just be, kind of take on a life of its own. So it's also dangerous. It's a little bit of a high wire act because if you don't give me enough details and, I have a scene where we're at the beach, but we're supposed to be in the woods, we got a problem. So that's what we do to avoid any of those big problems is there's a set of pencil sketches that go in. I gave them 3. They would look at them. They would decide which one they like the best. Sometimes they would say, hey, can we combine the creature from sketch number 3, but we like the background to sketch number 1 and put those 2 together. So there was never like this major league surprise on the day the painting got delivered where we were so far out of whack that we had to redo anything. I kind of knew what the rules were when it came to being too scary. I knew we're not putting any blood on here, and in the paintings, you're never going to see the kid getting hurt. There's never going to be any. There can be something to scare them, but the kid themselves are not ever going to get hurt. Other than that, we didn't really have a lot of specific, rules about, oh, the teeth can't be bigger than this, or, the dog can't be meaner than, none of that kind of stuff. It was all kind of just, we had a good feel for what we could get away with. Almost never did I get done and I turned in a painting and they said, take it back. You need to fix this over here. That's a problem. And it was for 2 reasons. One, we were on such a tight schedule to put out a book once a month. They didn't have a lot of time to fool around. They may have had things in there that they thought that they would have liked to have changed, but tick, 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 hurry up, start the next one because we're well on our way. The only one that I really had to change was the painting called Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes. So for anybody who's listening who doesn't know what that cover is, it has 2 lawn gnomes on a lawn with a whole bunch of other classic 90s lawn stuff, pink flamingos, giant globe that was in the neighborhoods all around my house. And the gnomes were in there, and one had his arms folded, and in the final painting, the other one behind him is scratching the side of his head, and he's a little cross-eyed, and he's not the smarter one of the 2. Well, when I turned that painting in the first time, he wasn't scratching his head, he was picking his nose. And when I turned it in, everybody laughed. Everybody thought it was funny. It was like, yeah, that's great. It made everybody laugh. And right at the last minute, just before we went to print, somebody, nearer the top of the food chain said, we're sending these into the school. Let's not promote nose picking. Send it back to Tim and have him move it. So to move a finger from a nose to the side of the head, that's not a real change. That's easy stuff. That's nothing. So yeah, for the most part, every painting that when it left my desk was the one that you guys ended up seeing on the book covers. I always wish that we took photographs of all the paint. So for most book publishers, and when I did my jobs over the years, the typical setup was I would do my painting, I would give it to you, you would have it photographed, it would go on the book cover, they would hang on to the painting until the book actually was printed and came out and was shipped to the stores and everything was cool with the art. And then they would give me my art back. Because Goosebumps got very popular and they wanted to use the art over and over again, at the time, reproductions were hard to get. And they said, listen, Tim, we're going to pay you a little extra and we want to keep the paintings. So I, of course, at the time didn't think anything of it. That was extra money. Are you kidding me? I was on board right away. So that seemed like the greatest idea ever. And so they paid me extra and they hung on to the art. So what's interesting is I haven't seen any of those pieces of artwork since the day I finished them. So it's been over 30 years since I've seen any of those pieces, up close as real. I've seen reproductions millions of times, but yeah, it's been since the day I finished them, since I saw them or touched them. So in the 90s, no digital art. There was probably digital art somewhere, but it wasn't for us artists at home yet. I went to art school, learned all the traditional methods, oil painting, watercolor, gouache, and we did charcoal. We did, it was a classic art training school. And then also in that mix of stuff, I learned how to do acrylics. And acrylics are a water-based paint, but what's good and bad, depending on the user, is once it dries, it is permanent. It's there. You can't go back and wet the edge and make it go, or you can't come back later on and blend it off. It is dry. Now, I got used to, like I said, painting on cars and motorcycle tanks, and that's how that stuff worked. Once it was dry, it's dry. Can't go back and mess with it. So I learned that that was a good thing if you started to use it right. What was also nice is I like to paint with my hands on my artwork. So this acrylic stuff, once it's dry, man, it's so permanent. It's unbelievable. You could, and I have spilled a full cup of coffee onto a perfectly good acrylic painting. And if you just throw some water on top of that and quick wipe it off, it's perfectly fine. So I got used to it. I like putting my hands down, and I really got a good chance to work with it. It dries super fast, but I actually painted with a hair dryer in one hand and a paintbrush in the other. So I paint, dry, paint, dry, paint, dry, so I could go faster. The actual painting was 20 inches by 20 inches. It was on what was called a number 80 illustration board. It had a little bit of the finish of the board had a little tooth to it, not quite like canvas, but not super smooth like a plate finish. It had a little tooth to it, and the tooth actually, little tiny pebbly finish as you painted that surface, and that's why people like painting on canvas. It actually pulls the paint off the brush. So it's better if it's a plate finish, you'll put some paint on, and then if you go over the same stroke again, it comes off too. So that tooth helps keep it on the board where you wanted it the first time. And like I said, I did a combination of brush and airbrush. It was probably 80% brush. and 20% airbrush. Airbrush was there as a blending tool, just to put it down. If I, painted some edges and the transition from one color to another wasn't smooth, I could go in there with the airbrush and blend that off. But it gave it that slick, polished look to it. It looked like the stuff I was doing on motorcycle tanks and cars, that super slick stuff. A Goosebumps cover probably took me 35 hours, 30 to 40 hours to do. So I could do one a week. And when we were cranking, we were doing, there were months where I did more than one a week, but that wasn't a pace that I could maintain. I could do one a week without, making myself ill and, getting sleep and, having somewhat of a life. So, yeah, so it was about once a week. So that's how I was able to do my obligation of one Goosebumps a month, but then I could still throw a Bone Chillers and a Spine Tinglers and another one in that month before my obligation to the Goosebumps came around again. It's funny. I've never heard it described that way. Yeah, it was kind of a vortex. I was my own competition on the shelves. Yeah, it's like, boy, that Bone Chiller stuff looks like the Goosebumps. It's like, yeah, no kidding. What was interesting about that was, so I had a rep at the time who was handling, all the negotiations. And so the people who put out Bone Chillers approached us and said, "Oh, we see Tim's work. We really like it. Would you be interested in doing another kid series?" So we reached out to Scholastic and said, "Listen, we're getting approached by this other company who wants us to do something that's, really looks just like Goosebumps. How do you feel about that? And do you want to have some sort of exclusive contract or something? We just want to let you know this is going on. We didn't want to like do it and have them go, hey, what are you doing this thing behind our back?" And they went, oh, that's interesting. Let us, we're going to have a meeting about it and then we'll get back to you. And within a couple of days, they got back to us and they said, no, you know what? Go ahead. You can go ahead and do it and have fun. And, we're good. You have our blessing to go do it. So that was cool of them. They could have easily said, no, we don't want to, we're not sharing you with anybody else. And we only want you here. So that was nice. It was an ability for me to make a couple of more dollars along the way. Yeah, there's of course there's covers that you would change because again, like you'll have the cycle. Okay, got to get my sketches together. Okay, I'm going to come up with some ideas. Yeah, these ideas are okay, and then you send it in, and then after you send it, then you're already like halfway into the painting, and then you go, oh, I know what I could have done here. What would have been really cool is if took that and that moved forward and those moved back. And so, yeah, there was one in particular where that I really had that feeling where I went, oh, I missed a really good opportunity here to make this a little bit more interesting. And that was Go Eat Worms. So it's the notebook that's open and there's worms crawling in and out and it's kind of icky and cool. But I think what we should have seen is then way in the foreground, right coming out, a big giant worm that was right there that you couldn't miss. That should have been the focal point, not a bunch of little worms, one big giant one, and maybe give him some kind of wild face and turn it into more of a creature. There's the ones, the big three, people who come up and point to artwork when I'm at a convention. The big three are Night of the Living Dummy, The Haunted Mask, and A Day at Horrorland. Those are the big three. Those are the ones that people point to, talk about, say those are the ones that gave them nightmares, or the book had to be face down before they went to bed, or the book had to be in another room, or I've heard them all. But yeah, those are the heavy hitters, and I love them too.